Let's carry on then with starting to add some mix processing effects to these tracks to help gel them together more and make the mix more cohesive. So, what you've probably noticed is that these different instruments I'm using have been recorded in different places and have their own room sound to them. Now, this can make them feel like the instruments don't all really sit together very well. Now, a nice way to solve this is to create some reverb sends, like I showed you in a previous earlier video. And then by applying amounts of the same reverb across the tracks will help gel them together as if they're all in the same space. So, as I mentioned in a previous video, I've used two different types of reverb, and both of them have Hall presets on them because these are really popular patches to use on epic cinematic style tracks. If you think of cinematic pieces, they're tracks recorded by orchestras which have been recorded in specific halls like Abbey Road Studios or Air Studios, so it only makes sense to help gel them together with a Hall patch. So as I mentioned, I've used two reverbs. The first one is an algorithmic Hall patch with a shorter sort of reverb time. And then the second one is an impulse response reverb with a much longer reverb time of 2.2 seconds. And I think by using a mix of two different types of reverbs will really help enhance your mix. The algorithmic one has a slightly shorter tail, so it's aiming at the early reflections of the sound. And then with the impulse response one, it has a longer tail focusing on the late reflection of the sound. So what I'm going to do is go through some of my tracks and place bits of reverb on them to help bring them together. I'm not going to show you all of them, maybe just a few to show you how it works and then show you how it sounds in the end. I'd like to first demonstrate with these percussion instruments. Let's start off with the Damage Armageddon Ensemble. So I will mute all of these, and then I'm just going to jump across to my mix window. Let's pull this up. Cool. So here we go. This is the Damage Ensemble patch. Then I can add a bit of the early reflection sound, just to impart that shorter reverb on it. And then the second longer tail reverb. So now you can hear that sense of space on that percussion instrument. So here it is before. And now after. Now let's move along to the other instruments. With the wood percussion, so here before and after. Really adding a sense of space. Now, these timp instruments already have a room sound in them, so I'm just going to be dialing in a small amount of reverb onto them. So as you can see, it's really helping tying these different tracks together by using a similar space. And with these snares, they also already have a space they belong. So let's add in a tad bit of these two send amounts. Then the metals. You can push them quite far back by applying a lot of reverb. That's the reverb on the percussion. Just to show you how far things can go, this is it before. it's a little dry. And then by adding in the reverb sense to give it that sense of space. So that's just a great way to tie your different tracks together that have been recorded in different spaces and come from different sample libraries. Just use some reverbs and add some send amounts on them to help tie all the tracks together to one space. Now let's look at some other mixing processes. I'm not going to be covering mixing in its entirety in this series. You can take a look at other Groove 3 mixing series videos to get a better understanding on mixing. But just to show you what I've done, I've added some EQs to most of my tracks in the song. And most of them have a sort of low cut applied to them. By removing some of this low end, we'll just remove that low rumble sound that's not audible to us and just give some extra headroom in the mix. And sounds that are a bit more bass heavy, I've done some slight boosts in the bass to accentuate those areas. And then, for example, with some instruments with some higher registers, like the cymbal rolls, for these, I've done low cuts to cut out the low rumble noise or the areas that it won't be occupying, and then giving it a high shelf boost just to excite that high register. So, as with any mixing, you're making space for specific instruments. So as you go through your mixing, just make some dips in areas that you want to pull down, and there will be some increases in some areas to make space for them. So as you can see, it's been a pretty standard mixing process where you have space for each instrument in the mix by enhancing or cutting out bands. And generally, I think mainly only the percussion needs some compression on it. It just helps even out the dynamics. This obviously depends on the material, but this is mainly the case. These are the big thunderous drums, and a tad bit of compression will help tame out those dynamics and big peaks. So you can see that compression is just helping even out the dynamics. Other than that, I haven't really added too many other effects across the tracks. I've just got a stereo delay on the flutes, just to give it a bit more lushness to the sound. So if I just solo those flutes and find them, if I take the delay off, just adding some extra detail to it. But other than that, as you can see, there isn't much effects across the other tracks. This is just purely my mixing taste and preference, but you might find that you want to add more compression across the mix or on some of your other tracks. Or maybe you want to add some modulation effects like chorus and delays. So I'll leave this up to you. I just wanted to give you a quick rundown on how I've mixed this track. So what I've done, like I showed you, is I've gone through and adjusted the levels accordingly. I've added some automation to show some different volumes in areas by accentuating some areas and dipping some areas. Then I've applied some slight panning where needed. And then I've used 2 reverb sends to help give a sense of space that all these tracks belong in. Then I've done some slight EQ changes just to make sure that specific instruments stand out in their main frequency areas. And then some slight compression has been applied to the percussion bus group just to help even out the dynamics. Other than that, it's quite a simple mix. Next, let's take a look at how to finalize this song and export out audio stems.